But
weren't the
other states,
Russians here early on too, or maybe
yeah,
that was up in Alaska? I think
no,
they
no,
actually
no,
came
no.
down to California.
They went right. I think there's a part in San Francisco. It's called Russian Hill or something like that. They had a fort on there. San Francisco was like
Apparently, Putin discovered America in his time machine. I did not know that. It's wild, weird stuff.
he's
Yes,
immortal. He's
he's
immortal.
everywhere, sir.
Well, Russia.
He's in with us in the room right now, sir.
Yeah, Russia was all the way down to San Francisco, as far as they got, but it was coastal only. It was Alaska, and then all the coast right up until like
Apparently, they
California.
stopped because it was too gay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Russians don't like the Russians just voted against gay marriage. By the way, they had a referendum, which is the way it should be done. Can't be done by like top down. They had a vote, and they made gay marriage. They didn't outlaw it. It just never was legal to begin with. So everyone claims Russia's not a democracy because they actually have elections. It's one of those weird things where like they attack Russia for doing democratic stuff if the vote goes against what the democracy want. Like the West wants. The West.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I think Putin might be doing some dictator shit with how he gets reelected, but I don't know.
Well, I read shit.
I think
where,
he's relatively popular. I don't think
yeah.
everybody in Russia likes him, but I think he's relatively popular.
Everything I ever read about Putin, like Erdogan of Turkey, right? I'm no fan of Erdogan or Turkey, but like he seems to be genuinely popular among the people in Turkey, but he's called a dictator too, and he acts like a dictator. But I think that's because he has such power among the people. Like FDR was called a dictator by the Republicans because he kept winning elections, and if you win a lot of elections, people start saying like there's no hope.
Erdogan. Erdogan. What do you call it when you can't breathe? Hello.
Oh,
I don't know. This is my special. This is my Johnny Carson special for the 4th of July.
you're making me nostalgic for Kreskin, for the old Johnny Carson.
Well, no, it was Karnak. Kreskin was
Karnak. Oh my God, it was 40. How many years ago was it since fucking Carson? I start forgetting. I was a kid.
He went off the air in the early 90s.
My God, that's a long time ago, my friend. That's a lifetime ago. You're still remembering.
Like 30 years ago.
Yeah, that's a lifetime. And it was good stuff. I saw, you were right at this cusp of like the best sort of like experience where we could experience the past through television, I guess, and sort of experience the future. There's people like who are born just now who in 20 years old.
Well, people talk about either millennials or Zoomers or whatever being so smart and stuff because they grew up with the internet. But I think there's something to be said to growing up without it, though, because the internet is a useful tool. We're on it now, and you get lots of information, but you can also be brainwashed through it. And I think one thing is, there used to be more control. See, it was more subtle. The messages from like TV and stuff, you'd only have a few channels, and so they would control the news or whatever. But they would have a light touch, and they wouldn't be pushing like anti-American stuff. And then plus, people now are on the internet all day. And people sometimes used to watch TV all day, but I still think it was less.
There was, if I do recall, back in the day, what was on the air, self-censorship happening, where there's.
I think it was controlled, but it was a lot more subtle than it is now.
Subtle, right? It was sort of like this is the official narrative, and
like they would pander to normies, and they wouldn't be like saying like "fuck America" and stuff like that.
Right, exactly. And there was outlets for like mostly on radio, like AM radio and shortwave radio and newsletters and alternative newspapers and magazines where you got like sort of like the fringe ideas, including like the High Times. I remember in the 1980s, some of my friends would like, oh my God, did you see this magazine called High Times? It's all about marijuana. I never smoked or did anything, but they were really into it. All my friends were druggies. So oh man,
I thought they were fat goth girls.
No, well, stoners, like my in my scene in the 80s. In high school, there was there was the jocks, obviously, and then there was the preppies and all the cliches. All my, I kind of liked hanging around the stoner group. This, do this drug, and I would say no, and that was the end of it. We all liked heavy metal music, and we liked certain shit, so we hung out. And they were like, "Oh my God, look at the High Times magazine." It was underground. You couldn't even find it in the High Times magazine. It wasn't in by the illegal fireworks. And speaking of Fourth, that's where you would find stuff like that. I told you the story. My whole thing was like you couldn't even get porn easily. Like,
They would have dirty magazines at like the liquor stores and stuff, like
yeah,
more than they do now. At some point, they'd like sort of crack down on it, and then now magazines are kind of irrelevant. But they used to have like dirty magazines everywhere. When
no,
I think in the '70s,
I personally couldn't purchase one. It was hard to purchase one or get porn. My porn's once I realized like
it was harder to get hardcore to go to without a trench coat.
Yeah, well, I couldn't. I never purchased a Playboy. I never pretended I was like 18 and purchased a Playboy. They would have carded me and whatever, and I never got the. So I never bought one. If I remember, there was magazines. There was.
Here for the John Wayne interview where he's really racist.
Yeah,
doing a book report.
We should cancel it. Yeah.
Sir, you look like you're 16. Why do you talk like Johnny Carson?
Never mind.
You know as well as I do that there was some teenage kid in the 70s doing a Johnny Carson impression and buy porn. You know that happened. Trying to do that
Maybe.
adult voice. And there was some
people are probably doing Johnny Carson impressions since at least the 70s, not 60s.
Yeah. So
Rich Little used to be the big guy to do that, and then Dana Carvey. Kevin Spacey does a really good impression of him.
My brother, who's a millennial, he has never seen a Johnny Carson show. So
my impression is mostly ripped off from Dana Carvey.
Yeah. Like when he would watch, I would do a Johnny Carson. He's like, "Who are you doing? What celebrity are you doing?" And I go, "Johnny Carson." And he would tell me, "Who's Johnny Carson?" And I had to show him a YouTube video, that kind of stuff. So there was I think it was a dirty magazine, newspaper.
Here, let me explain my impression.
A newspaper, like it was like in the newsprint. It wasn't a magazine. It was like paper. Like the New York Times, but dirty.
Was that the one? It was like Al Goldstein or something.
Al Goldstein, yeah.
Like
but I never purchased any of that dirty stuff. Like once I figured out that the hot rod magazines and the motorcycle magazines had topless women in them, I was like, I'm golden. That's all. I'm like, that's it. But it was a simpler time, but it was also a more perverted time.
Well, yeah, you go to your friend's house, and in the garage they'd have like naked pictures hanging up.
I remember going on business trips with my dad. He would go downtown to buy supplies for his store, and I would accompany him because he needed somebody to carry stuff, right? So I'd enter these stores, and they had the calendars with naked women calendars. The classic. That was standard in the 1970s, guys. Pornography was everywhere. I thought it was.
Yeah, well, they started, in the 40s and 50s. They would have like the pinup calendars, which, they call it like cheesecake, and the women have clothes on. I guess sometimes it'd be risque, but usually it'd be relatively tame, and they'd have clothes on. But then then it's the 60s, and there's Playboy, and then there's like the 70s, and then people are like, "Fuck it, I'm just gonna, hang up pictures of naked chicks everywhere," and then they cut, and then. In the 80s or 90s or whenever, they're like, human resources doesn't like you hanging up naked pictures in your workspace.
It's one of these things no one wants to address. It's like we had this thing called the sexual revolution in the 1970s.
Well, yeah, in the 60s and 70s, yeah, and then they used to push this idea that just everybody should be having sex with everybody all the time. Which is where a lot of that's where it came from, why everybody would hang up naked pictures everywhere.